The air in the trauma bay at St. Jude's Metro was a familiar cocktail of antiseptic, iron, and anxiety. For Nurse Thorne, it was a diluted, almost bland version of a scent she knew too well. She moved with an economy of motion that her colleagues mistook for timidity. Eris Thorne. 5'6", with unassuming brown hair pulled back so tightly it erased any hint of personality, and eyes the color of a stormy sea that she kept fixed on charts and monitors. To the swaggering residents and the god-complex surgeons, she was just another part of the background, a competent, quiet nurse. Nothing more. That was the point. "Thorne, get a move on with that IV setup on bed 3, Dr. Mark Cross barked, not even bothering to look up from the chart he was scribbling on. "Some of us are trying to practice medicine here, not watch the grass grow." Eris didn't flinch. She simply secured the catheter, taped it down with practiced precision, and adjusted the saline drip. "It's done, doctor," she said, her voice a low monotone that offered no friction, no challenge. Cross grunted, a sound of perpetual dissatisfaction. He was the chief of trauma surgery, a man whose arrogance was matched only by his skill with a scalpel inside the pristine, predictable world of a civilian operating room. He saw Eris as a cog, a pair of hands to carry out his orders. He had no idea those hands had performed emergency thoracotomies in the back of a blacked-out helicopter, under fire, with nothing but a headlamp and a prayer. He had no idea the quiet nurse in his ER had packed wounds from IEDs, reset shattered limbs in the middle of firefights, and made life-or-death decisions that would have crushed a man like him. She was a ghost, and ghosts were meant to be invisible. The piercing wail of an incoming ambulance cut through the controlled chaos of the emergency department. It was different this time. The siren wasn't just urgent, it was frantic. "ETA, 2 minutes," a charge nurse yelled. "Single GSW, male, 30s, unstable. MTP has been activated." Massive transfusion protocol. The word sent a jolt through the department. Cross puffed out his chest. This was his arena. "All right, people, let's look alive," he commanded, clapping his hands together. "Thorne, you're on vitals and access. Don't get in the way." Eris nodded, her face a blank mask. But inside, a cold dread was coiling in her stomach. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the same electric hum that always preceded the worst moments of her previous life. The ambulance doors burst open. The paramedics rushed in with the gurney, their faces grim. On the stretcher was a man, muscular and tattooed, his face pale and beaded with sweat. A pressure dressing on his abdomen was soaked a dark, terrifying crimson. But it wasn't the patient that made everyone freeze. It was what was trotting alongside the gurney, held on a short lead by a stone-faced police officer, a Belgian Malinois, lean and powerful, its fur the color of desert sand. Its intelligent eyes scanned every person in the room, and a low, guttural growl vibrated from its chest. It was a weapon with a heartbeat. "Animal control is on its way," the officer said, his knuckles white on the leash. "He won't let anyone but the medics near him. This is his handler." The dog, Odin, fixed its gaze on the patient, whining softly, then looked back at the assembled medical staff, its growl deepening into a clear threat. "We don't have time for this," Cross snapped. "Get that beast out of my trauma bay." The officer tried to pull the dog back. Odin planted its feet, the growl escalating to a ferocious snarl that echoed off the tiled walls. It was a living, breathing barrier. Eris stared at the patient on the gurney, the specific wrap of the field dressing, the tattoo of a Valkyrie on his forearm, the faint, jagged scar above his right eyebrow. Her blood ran cold. It couldn't be. The monitor started screaming. "BP is 60/30 and dropping. Tachy at 180, a resident shouted. "He's circling the drain," Cross said, shoving people aside. "We need to get him to the OR now. Sedate that damn dog if you have to." The patient's eyelids fluttered. His gaze, hazy with shock and pain, swept the room. It landed on Aris, a flicker of recognition. His lips moved, forming a single, breathless word, a name no one in this hospital had ever heard. Wraith. The room fell silent, save for the frantic beeping of the machines. Section Cross stared from the dying man to the quiet nurse. "What did he call you?" Aris didn't answer. Her focus was absolute. The patient was crashing. The dog was an immovable obstacle. And the man on the table was Sergeant Cole Reisner. Rico. A man she had pulled from the wreckage of a downed little bird in the Kandahar province. A man she thought was dead. Her past had just kicked down the door and walked into her present. Odin, sensing the rising panic, lunged forward, barking with such force that even Cross took a step back. "I said get that animal out of here," he roared. "No," Aris said. The word was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a razor. Every head turned to her. Dr. Cross looked at her as if she'd grown a second head. "What did you just say to me, nurse?" Aris stepped forward, ignoring the surgeon, ignoring the shocked stares. She walked directly toward the snarling dog. The police officer tensed. "Ma'am, I wouldn't do that." She held up a hand, never taking her eyes off the animal. Odin's hackles were raised, teeth bared. Aris stopped a few feet away. She knelt slightly, making herself smaller, less of a threat. And then she spoke. Her voice was different. It was no longer the flat, unassuming tone of Nurse Thorne. This was a voice of command, of calm authority forged in chaos. Asher Haya. The Hebrew phrase was low and steady. "I am that I am." The response code. The dog instantly stopped growling, its head cocked, its ears swiveled. Aris spoke again, a different phrase, this one in Pashto, a release command only a handler would know. "Delta Wasata. Stay here." The Malinois whined once, then immediately sat, its body still tense, but its aggression gone. It looked from Aris to Rico, then back to Aris, its eyes filled with a desperate understanding. The entire trauma team was frozen in stunned silence. Aris stood up and turned to face them. The ghost was gone. In her place stood someone else entirely. "His name is Sergeant Cole Reisner," she said, her voice ringing with an authority no one had ever heard from her. "The bullet is likely a 9mm hollow point. But the real damage isn't the entry wound. It's the fragmentation and the internal pressure wave from a close-range shot. His liver is probably shredded, and he's bleeding into his peritoneum. Standard laparotomy is too slow. He'll be dead before you get him open." Cross stared, his mouth agape. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the person who's going to save his life," she stated, stripping off her nurse's outer layer to reveal the plain blue scrubs beneath. "Get me a thoracotomy tray, a giggly saw, and a vascular clamp. Now." Not a request, a command. A thoracotomy? For an abdominal GSW? That's insane, Cross sputtered, finding his voice. "That's malpractice." "It's called a resuscitative thoracotomy with aortic cross-clamping," Aris countered, her eyes like chips of ice. "It will stop the bleeding to his lower body and redirect what little blood he has left to his heart and brain, buying us time to get him to the OR. It's his only chance." "We don't do that in the ER. It's a butcher's move." "In your ER, maybe," she shot back. "Where I come from, it's the difference between a body bag and a fighting chance." The patient, Rico, groaned, his eyes rolling back. The monitor let out a long, continuous shriek. "He's in V-fib," someone yelled. "Paddles! He's flatlining!" Cross looked from the flat line on the monitor to Aris's unwavering gaze. He was the chief of trauma. This was his kingdom. But his kingdom was burning down around him, and the patient was dead. Every instinct, Every word of his medical training screamed that this was over. Eris moved, a blur of blue scrubs. She vaulted onto a step stool beside the gurney. "No time for the saw," she yelled to the room at large. "Get me a scalpel, 10-blade, and start cracking Oneg bags. Hang them on pressure infusers." A terrified-looking junior resident slapped a scalpel into her outstretched hand. "What are you doing?" Cross demanded, his voice a mix of fury and horror. "I'm bringing him back," Oris said. She didn't look at him. She looked at Rico. "I didn't lose you then, and I'm not losing you now." With a single, decisive motion, she sliced through the skin and muscle of Rico's left chest between the 4th and 5th ribs. It was a deep, brutal cut, from the sternum to the back. Gasps filled the room. "Get me rib spreaders," she commanded, not waiting for a response. She shoved her hands into the opening, forcing the ribs apart with sheer strength. Blood welled up, but she ignored it. Her hands were inside his chest cavity. The room was utterly silent now, save for the horrifying sound of Aris working and the dead tone of the flatline. The arrogant chief surgeon, the seasoned nurses, the cocky residents, they were all statues, witnesses to something impossible, something primal. "His lung has collapsed," she announced, her voice strained with effort. "He has a massive hemothorax, but that's not the problem." Her hand delved deeper. "His pericardium is full of blood, cardiac tamponade. The heart can't beat." Her fingers found the slick, swollen sac around the heart. Scissors! Someone, moving on pure reflex, placed a pair of trauma shears in her hand. She worked blind, by feel alone, a skill honed in darkness and desperation. She snipped the pericardial sac. A gush of dark, pent-up blood spilled out over her gloves. And then she took his heart in her hand, his still, useless heart. She began to squeeze it. Rhythmic, firm compressions. Open chest cardiac massage. A procedure so rare, so extreme in a civilian setting, that most of them had only ever read about it in textbooks. "Come on, Rico," she whispered, a prayer lost in the clinical nightmare. "Come on. Squeeze. Release. Squeeze. Release." "Still flatline," a nurse said, her voice trembling. "I need a direct cardiac shock," Oris said, her face a mask of concentration. "Get me the internal paddles. Charge to 20 joules." Cross finally broke out of his stupor. "Thorne, what you're doing?" "My name," she said, never breaking rhythm, "is Dr. Aris Thorne. Former Major, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. And you are going to hand me those paddles, Doctor, or I will go through you." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. A Delta surgeon, not just military, the best of the best. A ghost who had operated in the shadows. Cross, his face pale with a mixture of shock and dawning respect, grabbed the small, spoon-shaped internal paddles himself. Charging to 20, the machine whined. "Charged," he said, his voice now quiet, deferential. "Clear," Eris commanded. She placed the paddles directly onto Rico's heart. A small twitch. The monitor blipped. Once, then flatline again. Again. 30. Cross upped the charge. Another shock. The monitor blipped. A weak, disorganized rhythm appeared. "Ventricular fibrillation," Aris diagnosed instantly. "He's trying. One more time. 50. The third shock convulsed the heart in her hand, and then, a miracle. Beep, beep, beep. A slow, weak, but steady sinus rhythm appeared on the screen. A collective gasp went through the room. They had just witnessed a resurrection. "We have a pulse," Aris said, her voice calm again. "It's thready, but it's there. Now clamp the descending aorta." She guided Cross's hand, showing him where to place the vascular clamp on the great vessel deep within the chest. "This stops the bleed out below. Now we have a chance. Let's move. Get him to the OR. I'll keep his heart going manually until we get him on bypass." The entire team, once frozen, exploded into a whirlwind of controlled, purposeful action. But they weren't following Cross's orders anymore. They were following hers. As they rushed the gurney out of the trauma bay and toward the operating theater, Cross fell into step beside Aris. He looked at her arms covered in blood up to the elbows, at the fierce, unwavering concentration on her face. "Dr. Thorne," he began, his voice stripped of all its earlier arrogance. "Not now, doctor," she cut him off. "Later. Right now, we have a soldier to save." He simply nodded, a student in the presence of a master. The awe in the room was palpable. They had thought she was a quiet nurse. They had just learned she was a force of nature. The next 6 hours were a masterclass in trauma surgery. In the operating room, Dr. Thorne, no one dared call her Nurse Thorne now, moved with a speed and precision that was inhuman. She was the conductor of a symphony of survival, and the OR staff were her orchestra. "More lap pads. Suction here. 4-0 proline." Her commands were quiet, but absolute. She repaired the shredded liver, resected a section of damaged bowel, and located and ligated a dozen bleeding vessels that Cross admitted he never would have found in time. She worked with an improvisational brilliance that defied the rigid protocols of civilian medicine. She used techniques they had never seen, field-expedient fixes designed for the worst-case scenarios, executed with the flawless grace of a prima ballerina. When they finally closed, and Rico Reisner was stable, his vitals holding steady, a weary but profound silence fell over the room. Eris stripped off her gloves and stepped back from the table, the adrenaline finally beginning to recede, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its wake. Dr. Cross walked over to her. He looked at the patient, alive against all odds, and then at her. There was no trace of the arrogant man from the ER. "I have been a surgeon for 25 years, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "And I have never seen anything like what you did today. Not in person, not in a journal, not anywhere." He paused, swallowing his pride. "I was dismissive. I was arrogant. And I was wrong. You saved that man's life when I had already given him up for dead. I am profoundly sorry." It was more than an apology. It was a surrender, an acknowledgement of a hierarchy that had nothing to do with hospital administration charts and everything to do with pure, undeniable skill. "You did good work in here too, Doctor," Eris replied, her voice softer now, the hard edges worn away by fatigue. "You followed my lead. That's all that mattered." She walked out of the OR, leaving him standing there in stunned admiration. She found a quiet corner in the scrub room and leaned against the cool tile, finally letting the tremors start. It all came flooding back. The dust, the smell of cordite and burnt fuel, the mission that had broken her. Project Chimera, a black site operation so far off the books it didn't exist. Rico had been part of her team, a raid gone wrong, an ambush, multiple casualties, catastrophic injuries. She had worked for 36 hours straight, trying to hold back the tide of death. She had lost 2 of them. 2 good men. They had told her Rico had died on the evac chopper. The official report, signed by her commanding officer, Colonel Stryker, cited her emotional exhaustion and compromised judgment as contributing factors. They had scapegoated her. They had taken her skill, her dedication, and twisted it into a failure. They buried her career to cover up a botched operation. So she buried herself. Eris Thorne died that day, and a quiet, unassuming nurse was born from the ashes. She had run, hiding in plain sight in a world of beeping monitors and routine procedures, a place where no one would ever look for a Delta surgeon. Until today. Her past hadn't just found her. It had flatlined on her table. and she had brought it back to life. The next day, the hospital was buzzing. The story of the ghost surgeon had spread like wildfire. Nurses and doctors whispered in the hallways, stealing glances at Eris as she did her rounds, now wearing a doctor's coat that someone had left for her. She was an enigma, a legend brought to life. She sat by Rico's bedside in the ICU. He was intubated and sedated, but he was alive. The Malinois, Odin, was curled up on a mat at the foot of the bed, a special exception granted by a hospital administrator who had heard the story and wasn't about to argue. The dog hadn't left his side. Dr. Cross entered the room quietly. His labs look good. No signs of reperfusion injury. It's a miracle. Eris just nodded, her eyes on Rico's face. "The chief of staff wants to see you," Cross said. "They're confused about your employment records. A registered nurse with the surgical skills of a god." "My records are what I wanted them to be," she said flatly. "Eris," Cross began, his tone gentle. "You don't have to tell me anything. But what happened? Why was a surgeon like you working as a nurse? I am a ghost. I ran from the people who betrayed me, the mission that broke me. I blamed myself for the men I couldn't save. For Rico, who I thought was one of them." She didn't say the words aloud. She couldn't. "It's complicated," was all she offered. Rico stirred. His eyes opened, clouded by medication. But they found her. He reached out a trembling hand. Eris took it. His fingers tightened around hers. He tried to speak around the breathing tube, the sounds muffled. "Not your fault," he rasped. Tears pricked at Eris's eyes for the first time in years. "It was a set-up wraith," he mouthed, his expression urgent. "Stryker! He sold us out." The name hit her like a punch to the gut. Colonel Stryker, the man who had written her career's obituary, the man who had told her Rico was dead. It wasn't a failure. It was a betrayal. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The botched intel, the perfectly placed ambush, Stryker's quickness to blame her and bury the entire operation. And now, years later, Rico turns up in her city with a bullet in him. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a loose end. And now she was one, too. Her fingerprints from the surgical suite, her name on the chart. It was like a flare fired into the night sky. They would know she was here. They would be coming. "Cross," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly serious whisper. "Get him moved. A private room, no name on the door, and double the security on this floor." "Why? What's going on?" "The people who shot him aren't going to stop trying until he's dead," she said. "And now, they'll be coming for me, too." The conspiratorial tone she had adopted was far more chilling than the authority she had brandished in the operating room. Before Cross could ask another question, two men in impeccable black suits walked into the ICU. They moved with a fluid, predatory grace that didn't belong in a hospital. Their eyes swept the room, cataloging every person, every exit. "We're with the State Department," the lead man said, his voice smooth and cold. He flashed a badge that looked official enough to be real. "We're here to take custody of Sergeant Reisner, national security matter." Eris stepped between them and Rico's bed. Odin rose to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "This man is a patient in critical condition," Eris stated, her voice steel. "He's not going anywhere." The man smiled, a thin, humorless expression. "I don't think you understand. We're not asking." "And I don't think you understand who you're talking to," Cross interjected, stepping up beside Eris. He had seen her perform a medical miracle. He wasn't about to doubt her now. "I am the chief of trauma at this hospital, and I am telling you that this patient is medically unstable for transport. You will leave, or I will have security escort you out." The second agent chuckled. "Your hospital security won't be a problem." The lead agent's eyes were fixed on Eris. "Major Thorne, It's been a long time. Director Stryker sends his regards. He's very eager to speak with you. Director. So Stryker had gotten a promotion for his betrayal. Tell Stryker to go to hell, Aris said. He has a message for you, the agent continued, undeterred. He said to remind you of Kandahar, to remind you of the consequences of non-compliance. He's on his way. He'd like to avoid a scene. The threat was clear. Comply, or this hospital becomes a battlefield. What would you have done in Dr. Thorne's position? Would you hand over the patient to protect the hospital, or stand your ground and risk everyone's lives? Share your thoughts in the comments. The agents stepped back, their point made. You have 1 hour to prepare him for transport, the lead agent said. Then we take him. With or without your cooperation. They turned and walked out, their footsteps echoing in the tense silence. My God, Cross whispered. Who are these people? The reason I disappeared, Aris said grimly. They're cleaners. They work for a man who erases problems. And Rico and I are problems he thought he'd already solved. She looked at Rico, vulnerable in the hospital bed. She had a choice. Run again. Grab Rico and disappear. Spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Or stay. Fight. Right here. Right now. The ghost had been running for years. But the surgeon, the soldier, she never backed down from a fight. I am done running. This ends today. On my terms. Cross, I need your help, she said, turning to him. Anything, he answered without hesitation. Lock down this hospital. Announce a code silver, active threat. Get all civilian patients and non-essential staff to secure areas. I want every door locked, every elevator shut down. Turn this place into a fortress. And then what? Then you get Rico to the one place in this hospital they won't expect, she said, a plan forming in her mind. A place I can defend. An hour later, Director Stryker stepped out of a black SUV that had pulled up to the hospital's main entrance. He was a man in his late 50s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and eyes that held no warmth. He was flanked by a team of 6 agents, all dressed in tactical gear. They found the hospital in lockdown. Steel shutters were down, doors were mag-locked. A frantic-looking hospital administrator met them at the entrance. I'm sorry, sir. There's been an emergency, a gas leak. The building has been evacuated and sealed. Stryker smiled coldly. I appreciate the theater, but we both know that's not true. Open the doors. He pushed past the administrator, and his team followed, using override keys to bypass the security. The hospital was eerily quiet. Empty hallways stretched out under the flickering fluorescent lights. Find them, Stryker commanded. She can't have gone far. His team spread out, moving with practiced efficiency. Stryker walked to the ICU, expecting to find it empty, but it wasn't. Aris was there. She was standing alone in the middle of the room, dressed in fresh scrubs. Stryker, she said, her voice calm. Major Thorne, he replied, his tone laced with false cordiality. You've caused me a great deal of trouble. I thought you were content playing nurse. I was, she said. Then you sent your thugs to kill my patient. You got sloppy. Reisner was a loose end. And a traitor, Stryker said, stepping closer. He started talking to the wrong people about Project Chimera, about what really happened in Kandahar. You mean about how you sold out your own men for a promotion? Aris countered. Leaked the mission parameters to a rival faction in exchange for their cooperation on a future objective? I've had some time to piece it all together. Stryker's eye twitched. You were always too smart for your own good. It's a shame. You were the best surgeon I ever had. I'm still the best, she said, and you're not taking my patient. Where is he? Stryker demanded, his voice hardening. Safe. There's nowhere in this hospital you can hide him from me, he sneered. My men are sweeping every floor. They won't find him, Aris said with a confident smirk. Because he's not on any floor. Stryker paused, confused. Aris tapped her foot. This hospital has a fully functional, lead-lined radiology suite in the sub-basement. Specifically, an old MRI machine that's been decommissioned, but is still shielded. Perfect for hiding a man from people who might be using thermal imagers or other advanced sensors. Stryker's face darkened with rage. You always did think outside the box. It was the only way to survive under your command, she retorted. It doesn't matter, he snarled. I'll find him eventually. But first you and I are going to have a conversation. He gestured, and two of his agents moved to flank her. You have two options, Aris. You can come with us quietly, and we can find a new use for your unique talents. Project Chimera is still very much active, and we need a new head of medical. A black site, unlimited budget, no oversight. A surgeon's dream. A monster's dream, she corrected. Or, Stryker continued, ignoring her. You can refuse. In which case, my men have instructions. An unfortunate and tragic shootout in the hospital. A heroic nurse caught in the crossfire. A sad story, but a clean one. It was the choice. Join the corrupt system that had destroyed her life, or die fighting it. The agents tensed, ready to grab her. It's a generous offer, Stryker, Aris said, her eyes glinting. But I think I'll take option 3. There is no option 3, he said. There's always a third way, she replied. You taught me that. Improvise. Adapt. Overcome. She raised her hand and pointed toward the ceiling. Stryker and his men looked up. They saw nothing but a ceiling tile. In that split second of distraction, Aris moved. She stomped down hard on the lead agent's instep, shattering the small bones in his foot. As he screamed and buckled, she pivoted, driving her elbow into the throat of the second agent, crushing his windpipe. It was brutal, efficient, and utterly unexpected. She wasn't just a surgeon. She was a Delta operator. She had been trained in more than just medicine. Before Stryker could even react, she had snatched the fallen agent's sidearm. She didn't point it at him. She pointed it at a large oxygen tank canister against the far wall. "Get out of my hospital," she said, her voice deadly calm. Stryker stared at her, then at the tank. A single bullet would turn the entire ICU into a fiery inferno. It was a madman's threat, and he knew she was just sane enough to carry it out. "You're insane," he breathed. "I learned from the best," she said. "This is my operating theater now, Stryker. And you are the disease. I suggest you remove yourself." From down the hall, they heard shouting. Stryker's men were encountering resistance, not from hospital security, from the police. And then the FBI. Dr. Cross hadn't just initiated a lockdown. He had made a phone call, a very specific phone call, to a number Aris had given him, a contact at the Inspector General's office. She had been collecting evidence on Stryker for years, a dead man's switch she never thought she'd have to use. Stryker's face went from rage to cold, calculating panic. He had been outmaneuvered. "This isn't over, Thorne," he hissed. "It is for you," she said. "You're a loose end now, Director. I wonder how long your employers will let you live." The truth of her words hit him. He was compromised. He turned and fled, disappearing down the hallway just as the first FBI tactical team stormed into the ICU. They saw Aris, armed and standing over two incapacitated men, and immediately raised their weapons. "FBI, drop the weapon!" Aris calmly placed the handgun on the floor and raised her hands. "My name is Dr. Aris Thorne," she said. "I believe you're here because of my call." The crisis was over. The battle was won. In the aftermath, the truth of Project Chimera and Stryker's betrayal came to light. Rico Reisner, under federal protection, made a full recovery and a full confession, corroborating every piece of evidence Aris had. Stryker was never found. He had become a ghost himself, swallowed by the same shadowy world he had helped create. Maurice was a hero. The quiet nurse had become a legend at St. Jude's. A few weeks later, she was sitting in the office of the hospital's chief of staff, with Dr. Cross sitting beside her. "Your story is incredible, Dr. Thorne," the administrator said, still looking at her file as if it were a work of fiction. "The Department of Defense has posthumously reinstated your rank and cleared your record with full honors." "That part of my life is over," Eris said. "Perhaps," the administrator said, leaning forward, "but your skills are not. Dr. Cross has come to me with a proposal, a new program, a Center for Advanced Trauma and Veteran Care, a rapid response surgical unit designed to handle the most extreme cases, utilizing a hybrid of military and civilian medical techniques. He says there's only one person in the world qualified to run it." Eris looked at Cross, who gave her a small, encouraging smile. It was a new beginning, a chance to integrate both halves of her life, the ghost and the surgeon. No more hiding, no more running, just a new purpose, forged from the fires of her past. "I have some conditions," she said, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time. "Name them," the administrator said. "First," Maurice said, "my lead intake specialist needs full hospital privileges and a permanent place on the ward." Cross looked confused. "Your lead intake specialist." The final scene is her, months later, standing in the newly christened Thorne Center for Advanced Trauma. She's wearing a doctor's coat that fits her perfectly, her name embroidered over the pocket. She's not hiding anymore. She's leading a team of residents, walking them through a complex case on a monitor. Her voice is confident, inspiring. The alarm sounds, a multi-casualty incident. "All right, people, you know the drill," she says, her voice calm in the coming storm. "Let's go save some lives." As her team rushes toward the ER, she pauses. Lying on a mat just inside the door to her office is Odin, the Belgian Malinois, who lifts his head and watches her with loyal, intelligent eyes. He thumps his tail once, her intake specialist. She was no longer haunted by her past, but empowered by it, surrounded by a new team, a new family. Dr. Eris Thorne was finally home.